The tray in front of me cracks down the middle, and the whole dining hall goes silent. I did not throw it. I did not even touch it. It fell because someone knocked it out of my hands on purpose, and now 300 alien eyes are turning toward me at once, waiting to see what the quiet human girl will do. My name is Alina Voss, and I have been holding my breath for 6 months. I am the only human student at the Caldris Learning Spire, a floating academy built above a gas giant that has no business being this beautiful. Silver towers spin slowly against orange clouds, and every single person who studies here, except for me, was born on a world where nothing bigger than a rabbit ever tried to eat them. That is why they are all so tall, so smooth-skinned, so confident in the way they walk through a room like the room owes them something. I was born on Earth. My people have a different kind of history. The boy standing over my broken tray is named Dren Kalu. He is from a warrior line, or so he tells everyone within the first 10 seconds of meeting them. His shoulders are wide, his voice is loud, and he has decided, somewhere in the last few weeks, that I am the perfect person to practice being cruel on. Maybe it is because I do not fight back. Maybe it is because I am small compared to him, at least in height. Maybe it is simply because I am new, and new is always the easiest target. "Pick it up," he says, and his voice carries across the hall like he wants an audience. He always wants an audience. I look down at the tray, then I look up at him. I do not say anything, because I learned a long time ago that silence does not give anyone new information to use against you. Words can be twisted. Silence just sits there. I bend down and pick up the tray. Someone laughs. Not at Dren, at me. A small, sharp laugh from a girl at the next table. The kind of laugh that tells you exactly what she thinks your worth is. I do not look at her. I stack the broken pieces neatly, the way my mother taught me to fold laundry even when I was upset, because doing small tasks carefully keeps your hands busy and your mind quiet. Dren leans down until his face is close to mine. He smells like the strange spiced oil his people use instead of soap. "You know," he says, loud enough for the tables around us, "back home, we have an old story about your planet, a story parents tell children to make them behave. They call it the Deathworld story, a world so terrible that if a person is born there and survives, they are already broken inside, twisted, dangerous. That is what they say Earth people are, broken things pretending to be calm." I keep stacking the tray pieces. "But I do not believe it," he continues, and he smiles like he has said something clever. "I think Earth people are just slow, weak. That is why you never talk back. That is why you never fight. You are not dangerous. You are just quiet because you have nothing to say. The hall is watching. I can feel it, the way you can feel sunlight on the back of your neck, even with your eyes closed. Dozens of alien faces waiting to see if the human girl will finally do something interesting. I do not. I stand up with the broken tray in my hands, and I walk to the return chute, and I place the pieces inside it, one at a time, without hurrying and without shaking. Then I walk to a different table, one that is empty, and I sit down, and I begin eating from the small container of food I brought with me, because I learned early that carrying my own meal means no one can decide what happens to it before I do. My hands do not shake. That is the part that would surprise them if they understood anything about me at all. My hands are perfectly steady, because steady hands are something I trained for a very long time, back on a planet where an unsteady hand at the wrong moment could be the last mistake you ever made. Nobody at Caldris Spire knows what Earth is really like. They know the old stories, the ones told to frighten children, the ones that talk about a lost, wild world full of storms and beasts and endless danger, a place so harsh that whatever crawled out of it and survived must be more monster than person. They tell the story, and then they laugh, because surely no real place could be like that. Surely it is only a legend, a scary bedtime tale with no truth inside it. They do not know that the story is not a legend. They do not know that it is, if anything, too gentle a description. My homeworld briefing folder, the one every human is required to memorize before leaving Earth, says this plainly: do not demonstrate your full physical capability in public. Do not react to provocation with speed. Do not lift, catch, or move objects faster than a comfortable human pace, even if your body wants to. The galaxy is not ready to understand you, and more importantly, the galaxy is not ready for how they might respond if they learn what you actually are. I read that folder every night before I sleep, like a kind of prayer. So I sit at my empty table and eat my food slowly, at a pace that would look completely ordinary to anyone watching, though it is much slower than I actually need. My reflexes want something different. My body was built on a planet where slow was the same thing as dead, where a storm could turn a calm afternoon into a fight for your life inside of 30 seconds, where the animals that shared my world with me had teeth built for creatures far bigger than a human being, and still, somehow, we had survived them, all of them, generation after generation, until survival itself became something written into our bones. None of that matters here. Here, I am the strange one, the slow one, the one who lets herself be laughed at because speaking up feels more dangerous than staying silent ever could. After the meal, I walk the long way back to my room, past the observation window that looks out over the gas giant. The clouds down there twist in patterns that remind me, strangely, of Earth's oceans during a hurricane, the kind of pattern that means something enormous is happening even when you cannot see all of it from where you stand. I press my hand against the cool glass, and I let myself breathe for exactly 10 seconds, counting slowly, the way I was taught. 10 seconds is enough. It is always enough, if you let it be. I think about home while I walk. I think about my little brother, who is probably right now running through the training paths behind our house, the ones our parents built specifically so children could practice moving fast, moving quiet, reading the wind before it turned dangerous. I think about my mother's hands, strong enough to break a fence post in half if she needed to, and how she uses them mostly to bake bread and braid hair. I think about how strength, on Earth, was never something loud. It was something quiet, something held in reserve, something you only spent when spending it mattered. I reach my room, and the door slides shut behind me, and only then do I let my shoulders drop. There is a picture on my desk of my family standing outside our home, my father's arm around my mother, my brother making a face at the camera, and me standing slightly apart from all of them, already the serious one, already the one who watched the horizon instead of the lens. I look at that picture every night. It reminds me why I am here, why I agreed to be part of the very first group of humans allowed to study among the wider galaxy, why I promised the people who sent me that I would be careful, that I would be patient, that I would represent my planet with quiet dignity instead of the reputation the old stories gave us. It has been 6 months, and so far I have kept that promise. But Dren Kalu is not finished with me, and somewhere deep down, in the part of my mind that still listens to instinct instead of instruction, I already know that a promise like mine has an ending built into it. Every quiet thing, if pushed hard enough, eventually stops being quiet. I do not know it yet, not fully, but that ending is closer than I think. That night, I message my brother back on Earth, 3 light years and 1 relay station away, and I tell him everything is fine, that classes are going well, that the food here is strange but not bad, that I am making progress with the other students. I do not tell him about Dren. I do not tell him about the tray, or the laughing, or the way 300 alien students watched me pick up broken pieces of plastic like it did not matter to me at all. He writes back almost instantly, because the time difference works out that way sometimes, and his message is short and simple in the way 12-year-old messages always are. He tells me a story about a wind pattern that nearly caught 2 hikers near our valley, how their father spotted the signs early and got them to shelter in time, how everyone is proud of how calm he stayed through the whole thing. I read that message twice before I put my communicator down. Calm, I think. That word again. It follows us everywhere, doesn't it? Everyone on Earth learns to be calm, because panic gets people killed, and children get taught from the earliest age that the ones who survive are never the ones who scream the loudest. They are the ones who go quiet, who watch, who wait for exactly the right moment before they move. I fall asleep thinking about my brother's steady hands, and my mother's careful voice, and my father's habit of counting to 10 before he ever raised his voice at anyone, even when he had every right to. I do not know yet that somewhere across the spire, Dren Kalu is telling his friends a new plan, one that involves me directly, one that will not be satisfied with broken trays or cruel jokes in a crowded hall. I do not know yet that his plan will find its way to someone I care about before it finds its way back to me, and I do not know yet that when it finally does reach me, all the counting to 10 in the galaxy will not be enough to stop what happens next. For now, though, I sleep, quiet, careful, patient, the way I was raised to be, the way every human before me has learned to be, on a world that never once let us forget what patience is worth, and what happens when it finally runs out. 3 days later, the harassment gets a new shape. It starts small, the way most dangerous things do. I find my study notes scattered across the floor of the shared learning hall, pages torn just enough to be useless, not enough to look like an accident. I find my seat in the gravity theory class occupied by someone else, who simply looks at me and says the seat was open, as if that erases the fact that I sat there every day for 2 months. I find whispers following me down corridors, whispers that stop the moment I turn my head, which is somehow worse than if they had kept going. Dren Kalu does not do these things with his own hands anymore. He does not need to. He has built himself a small circle of followers, students who laugh at his jokes and repeat his opinions and enjoy the feeling of being close to someone with his kind of confidence. They do the small things for him now, the torn notes and the taken seats, while he stands back and watches, arms crossed, like a general reviewing troops. I still do not react. I still walk the long way around trouble whenever I can. I still eat my meals at the empty table, alone, because alone is safer than being watched, and watched is safer than being provoked. But something new has entered my life during these 3 days, something that makes the situation heavier than it was before, and her name is Priya. Priya Solari is not human. She is from a small, gentle species called the Winari, a people who are, by every physical measure, even less suited to danger than the average alien student here. They are slight of build, quick of mind, and almost entirely without any instinct for confrontation, because their homeworld has no predators left, none at all, and has not had any for longer than their written history stretches back. I met her in the gravity theory class, back before someone decided my usual seat belonged to them. She sat beside me on the first day because, as she told me later with a small, embarrassed laugh, I was the only other student in the room who looked as lost as she felt. We started talking about equations, and then about food, and then about home, and somewhere in those conversations, without either of us really planning it, we became friends. Priya does not know the full truth about what I am capable of. Nobody here does, not really, not even the instructors who have read my file. But she knows I am kind to her, that I listen when she talks about missing her family, that I walk with her sometimes between classes so she does not have to walk alone through corridors full of students twice her size and 10 times her confidence. I did not expect that kindness to become a target. I should have. It happens on a day that starts ordinary and does not stay that way. I am walking to the observation deck, the one that looks out over the gas giant, because Priya asked me to meet her there before evening classes to look at the storm patterns together, something she finds endlessly fascinating in a way that reminds me, gently, of my little brother back home. I am almost there when I hear her voice, sharp with fear in a way I have never heard from her before, coming from the side corridor that connects the deck to the lower study halls. I turn the corner and I see them. Dren Kalu is standing very close to Priya, close enough that she has backed herself against the wall, one hand raised slightly in front of her, not to defend herself, because she would not know how, but simply because her body is trying to create distance that the corridor does not allow. Two of his friends stand nearby, not touching her, but not stopping him either, laughing in the low, ugly way people laugh when they know they will not be blamed for what someone else is doing. "I only want to know," Dren is saying, his voice pitched somewhere between amusement and menace, "if it is true what they say about your people, that you cannot even raise your voice properly, that your species forgot how to be afraid a long time ago because nothing on your world ever taught you to be." Priya says something quiet that I cannot hear from where I stand, and Dren laughs, and he reaches out and takes hold of her wrist, not hard, not yet, but firm enough that she cannot easily pull away, firm enough that I can see, even from a distance, the way her whole body goes rigid with a fear that has nowhere to go. Something in my chest turns over, slow and heavy, like a stone shifting at the bottom of a lake. I do not run to them. I have spent 6 months training myself out of fast movement, and even now, even with this, some part of my mind is still counting, still holding the line I promised to hold. I walk. Quickly, but I walk, and I keep my voice level when I speak, because level is what I have practiced. Level is the only tool I trust myself with in this moment. "Let go of her," I say. Dren turns his head toward me, and something in his expression shifts from casual cruelty into something closer to delight, because this, I realize too late, is exactly what he wanted all along. Not Priya, me. She was only ever the easiest way to bring me here, to bring me into a corridor with no instructors nearby and no crowd to perform for, just him, his 2 friends, and the human girl who has never once fought back against anything. "Alina," he says, releasing Priya's wrist so suddenly that she stumbles back against the wall. "I was wondering when you would show up. I have been waiting a long time to see what happens when your kind finally runs out of patience." Priya looks at me, and there is something in her face that breaks my heart a little, a kind of desperate hope, the look of someone who has just realized that the one person who might help her is standing between her and something dangerous, and does not yet know if that is a good thing or a very bad one. "Go," I tell her quietly, without looking away from Dren. "Go to the deck. I will be there soon." She hesitates. Then one of Dren's friends steps sideways, just enough to block her path, and I feel that stone in my chest turn over again, heavier this time. "Nobody said she could leave," Dren says, and he smiles, and it is a smile that has never once in his life been afraid of consequences, because he has never once in his life met anyone who could give him a reason to be. I think about my briefing folder. I think about the promise I made before I left Earth, the one about patience, about restraint, about representing my planet with quiet dignity, no matter what provocation came my way. I think about my mother's steady hands, my father's habit of counting before he spoke, my brother's careful voice describing a wind pattern that nearly caught 2 hikers who did not see the danger coming in time. I think about all of it, and I hold on to it as tightly as I can, because I know, somewhere underneath all my careful training, that the version of me sitting quietly beneath 6 months of restraint is not the only version of me that exists, and I am not entirely sure, in this narrow corridor with no crowd and no witnesses and no way out for Priya, that I will be able to keep her contained much longer. "Let her go," I say again, and this time my voice does not shake, but it does change, just slightly, in a way that I do not fully understand until later, a low, even tone that has more weight behind it than a simple sentence should carry. Dren notices. I can see it land on him, a flicker of something that might, in a smarter person, have been the first spark of caution, but Dren Kalu has never in his life had a reason to be cautious around anyone, and he is not about to start now, not in front of his friends, not in front of an audience of 2 frightened girls who, as far as he knows, pose no threat to him at all. "Or what?" he says, and he steps toward me instead of toward Priya, closing the distance between us with the easy confidence of someone who has never once considered the possibility that stepping closer to me might be the worst decision he makes today. I do not answer him with words. I take one slow, careful breath, the way I have been trained to do since I was small enough to sit on my father's knee while he explained why counting mattered, why patience mattered, why the strength inside us was only ever meant to be a last resort and never a first response. And then I hold that breath, and I hold my ground, and I wait, because even now, even with everything building inside me like storm clouds gathering over the gas giant outside, some quiet, disciplined part of me still believes there is a way through this corridor that does not end the way my instincts are telling me it might. I am wrong, but I do not know that yet. Dren reaches out and grabs my arm, the same way he grabbed Priya's wrist a moment before, careless, certain, utterly convinced that nothing about touching me could possibly be dangerous. His fingers close around my forearm, and for one long, suspended second, the entire corridor goes silent, the way the dining hall went silent when my tray hit the floor, except this silence feels different, heavier, like the moment before a storm breaks, rather than the moment after one has already passed. I look down at his hand on my arm, then I look up at his face, and something in my expression must change, because for the first time since I arrived at Kaldra's spire, I see Dren Kalu hesitate. It is only a small hesitation, a flicker, a half-second of doubt that crosses his face and is gone almost as quickly as it appeared, buried under 6 months of confidence that nothing about the quiet human girl could ever be worth being afraid of. He does not let go of my arm. If anything, his grip tightens, as if daring me to react, as if some part of him wants to see what happens if he pushes just a little further than he ever has before. I do not know, in this exact moment, that this small, careless decision is about to change everything. For him, for me, for Priya standing frozen against the wall, and for every single person on this station who still believes the old stories about Earth are only stories, meant to frighten children, meant to be laughed at once they grow old enough to know better. I do not know it yet, but I am about to find out, and so is he, and so is everyone watching from the shadows of that narrow corridor, that some silences are not empty at all. Some silences are simply waiting. The grip on my arm does not loosen, and for a moment neither of us moves, and I am aware of every small detail around me, the way I have only ever been aware of things during the worst storms back home, the ones that arrive so fast there is no warning at all, only a shift in the air pressure and a sudden, complete stillness right before everything breaks loose. Priya has not moved from the wall. Dren's 2 friends have gone quiet, watching, sensing without understanding exactly why that something in this corridor has changed, that the balance of the room has tilted in a direction none of them expected. Let go of my arm, I say, and my voice comes out low and even, without any tremor in it at all, which seems to surprise Dren more than anything I could have shouted. Or what? He says again. But the second time he says it, there is less confidence behind the words than there was the first time, as if some old buried instinct in him, some ancestral memory passed down from creatures who once knew what real danger felt like, is trying to warn him and failing to make itself heard over 6 months of easy victories. I think about my training. I think about the exercises my parents built into my childhood without ever calling them training, disguised as games, as chores, as simple lessons about patience and control. I think about the years spent learning exactly how much force it takes to open a stuck door, to lift a fallen tree branch off a trapped animal, to hold myself perfectly still while every muscle in my body wants to move, because moving too soon, back home, was so often the difference between living through a threat and becoming another quiet tragedy whispered about at dinner tables. I pull my arm back, slowly, deliberately, not with force, simply with steady, controlled resistance, the way you might pull a hand back from a hot stove, without panic, without wasted motion, just a clean, unhurried withdrawal that leaves no question about who controlled the movement. Dren's fingers slip from my arm before he intends them to, and something about that, something about losing his grip without deciding to, seems to strike a nerve in him that goes deeper than simple pride. "You think you can just walk away from me?" he says, and his voice rises now, loud enough to echo down the corridor, loud enough that I worry, for one brief moment, that an instructor might hear and come running, and then I realize that a part of me is hoping exactly that, hoping for an interruption, an excuse to end this before it goes any further than it already has. No instructor comes. I am not trying to walk away from you, I say, keeping my voice level, keeping my eyes on his, rather than letting them drift toward Priya, because I know that if I look at her fear again, something inside me will shift in a way I am not ready for. I am trying to leave with my friend, that is all. Nobody needs anything more to happen here. Your friend, Dren repeats, and he laughs, though the laugh sounds thinner than it did before, less certain, more like something he is performing for his friends than something he actually feels. Your friend is a Wanari, a species that forgot what fear even means because nothing on their world ever bothered to teach them, and you are supposed to be from the Deathworld, the terrible place, the planet so dangerous that everything born there is broken inside. Yet here you both stand, letting three of us do whatever we want, saying nothing, doing nothing. Maybe the old stories about your kind are wrong after all. Maybe you are exactly what you look like, weak. Something in that word lands differently than all the others that came before it. Not because it hurts me, not exactly, but because I recognize, in that single moment, that Dren Kalud genuinely believes it completely, believes that my silence for 6 months has been proof of weakness rather than proof of control, and that belief, more than anything else he has said or done, tells me something important about how this is going to end. He does not know what patience costs. He has never had to learn. Let us go, I say again, quieter this time, not because I am afraid, but because some part of me is still trying, one last time, to find a door out of this corridor that does not require anything more than words. Dren steps toward me instead of away, closing the last of the distance between us, close enough now that I can see the small flecks of gold in his eyes, close enough that I can feel the heat of his breath, close enough that his shoulder brushes mine as he leans down toward my face with the particular kind of menace that comes from someone who has never once, in his entire life, been made to feel small. "Make me," he says. The corridor holds its breath. I think, in that moment, about every version of restraint I have practiced since arriving at Caldra Spire. I think about the broken tray, about picking up the pieces without complaint. I think about torn notes, and stolen seats, and whispers that stopped the moment I turned around. I think about 6 months of choosing silence, choosing patience, choosing the quiet path even when every instinct in my body, every drop of ancestry passed down from a planet that never once made survival easy, was screaming at me that patience has limits, that restraint has a floor beneath it, and that floor is not made of nothing. I think about Priya's wrist in his hand a few minutes ago, the fear on her face, the way she looked at me like I might be the only thing standing between her and something she did not have the tools to survive on her own. And I think, finally, about the fact that he is still standing close enough to reach for her again the moment I turn to leave, that nothing about this corridor has actually ended, that walking away now would only delay this exact same scene for another day, another week, another corridor with no instructors and no witnesses and no way for either of us to escape it cleanly. "Elena," Priya says softly from the wall, her voice trembling, "please, let us just go. It does not matter. Please." But it does matter. That is the thing nobody here understands yet. The thing the old stories about my planet almost got right, except for one crucial detail. It is not that Earth people are broken. It is that we were built, over countless generations, by a world that demanded we understand exactly where the line was between patience and consequence, and demanded, above everything else, that we never forget the difference. Dren reaches for my arm again, faster this time, rougher, no longer playing at menace but actually meaning it. his fingers closing hard around my wrist in a way that would, on any other student in this corridor, leave a mark that lasted for days. And something in me, something quiet and old and patient, finally stops holding the line. I do not decide to move. That is the strange part, the part I will try to explain to people later and never quite manage to make them understand. There is no moment where I consciously choose to act. There is only the grip on my wrist, and then there is my hand, moving on its own, faster than anything in this corridor has ever moved, closing around his wrist in turn with a grip that I have spent my entire life learning never, ever to use on another living thing. Dren's eyes widen. For the first time since I met him, I see real fear cross his face. Not the performed menace he shows his friends, not the casual cruelty he wears like armor, but something raw and immediate. The look of a person suddenly realizing that everything he believed about the world a half-second ago was wrong. "Let go," he says, and his voice cracks slightly on the words, and I realize, distantly, that he is repeating the exact phrase I said to him only a few moments earlier, except now, the desperation runs in the opposite direction. I do not let go immediately. I hold his wrist, not tightly enough to hurt him, but tightly enough that he cannot pull free, and I look at him, really look at him, the way I have avoided looking at anyone here for 6 months, because looking too directly at anything on this station has always felt like a risk I could not afford to take. "You wanted to know what happens," I say quietly, "when my patience runs out. I did not want you to find out. I have spent 6 months trying to make sure nobody here ever found out, but you kept pushing, and pushing, and pushing, because you believed there was no floor beneath my silence. There was. There always was. You simply never found it, because nobody before you was foolish enough to keep looking." His friends have gone completely still, pressed slightly back against the far wall, watching with the kind of frozen attention that comes when a situation has changed so suddenly that nobody's mind has caught up with what their eyes are seeing. Priya has not moved either, though her hand has come up to cover her mouth, not in horror, not yet, but in something closer to disbelief, as if some part of her has always suspected there was more to me than I ever let show, and is only now watching that suspicion become real in front of her. I release Dren's wrist. He stumbles back a step, cradling his arm against his chest, staring at me with an expression I do not think he has ever worn before in his life, something between confusion and dawning terror, the look of a person recalculating everything they believed about their own safety in the span of a single heartbeat. "You," he says, and stops, as if he cannot find the rest of the sentence. "I am asking you, one more time," I say, and my voice is still quiet, still even, though something underneath it has changed in a way that even I can hear now, to let this end here. Walk away. Do not come near either of us again. This does not need to become anything more than it already has. For one long suspended moment, I believe he might actually listen. I believe, foolishly, hopefully, that this is the end of it, that the fear now written plainly across his face will be enough to close this door forever, that we might all simply walk away from this corridor and never speak of it again. But pride is a strange and dangerous thing, and Dren Kalu has built his entire identity on top of it, layer after layer, year after year, until there is very little of him left underneath that does not depend on being seen as strong, as untouchable, as someone other people fear rather than the other way around. And standing in front of his own friends, having just been made to feel smaller than he has ever felt in his life by the one student on this entire station he was certain he could never lose to, that pride does not let him walk away. It does the opposite. His face shifts from fear back into something harder, something colder, something that looks almost like rage dressed up as certainty, and I watch him decide, right in front of me, that the only way to undo what just happened is to make it happen again, harder this time, in a way that leaves no question about who holds the power in this corridor. "You do not get to threaten me," he says, and his voice has gone low now, low and dangerous in a way it has never been before, because for the first time, he actually means every word in front of my own people. Whatever you think you just proved, human, it does not matter. I am still stronger than you. I am still faster. I am still everything your pathetic little world could never make you. And then he moves toward me again, faster than before, faster than I expected, his hand reaching not for my wrist this time but higher, toward my shoulder, toward a grip meant to control rather than simply intimidate. And Priya makes a small, sharp sound of fear from the wall, and his two friends shift forward as if preparing to help him, and the corridor, which held its breath only moments ago, seems to collapse inward around all of us at once. I do not have time to count to 10. I do not have time to think about my briefing folder, or my promise, or my mother's steady hands, or my father's habit of counting before he spoke, or my brother's careful voice describing a storm that nearly took 2 lives before it was caught in time. There is only this narrow corridor, and this moment, and the sound of Dren Kalu's hand closing the last few inches toward my shoulder, and somewhere deep inside me, past 6 months of silence, past every ounce of training and restraint and patience I have carried since I first stepped off the ship that brought me here, something ancient and quiet finally decides that it has waited long enough. Everything after that happens very fast, and also, somehow, very slowly, the way time behaves during a real emergency, when the mind stops measuring seconds the ordinary way and starts measuring them by what needs to happen inside them instead. His hand reaches my shoulder. I step into the motion rather than away from it, which is the part nobody in that corridor expects, because every instinct they have ever seen from another living being tells them that a smaller person facing a larger, angrier one should retreat, should shrink, should try to create distance. I do not create distance. I close it, the way I was trained to close it, the way my ancestors learned to close it, against creatures on our homeworld that were faster and stronger and far more willing to end a confrontation quickly than any person standing in this corridor could imagine. My hands move with a certainty that comes only from years of quiet, careful practice, movements rehearsed so many times as a child that they no longer feel like decisions at all, only responses, clean and economical, without waste, without hesitation. It is over before Dren's friends even understand that it has begun. There is a brief, sharp motion, controlled completely, precise in a way that leaves no question about intention, and then there is a sound, low and final, and Dren Kalu goes still in a way that living things are never still, his body settling to the floor of the corridor with a soft, terrible finality that fills the narrow space more completely than any shout ever could have. I stand over him for a moment, breathing evenly, my hands steady at my sides, and I feel nothing like triumph. I feel, instead, a strange and hollow kind of quiet, the same quiet that comes after a storm passes on Earth, when the wind finally dies down and the world is left holding its breath, waiting to see what has been left behind. Priya makes a sound against the wall that is somewhere between a gasp and a sob, both hands pressed now against her mouth, her eyes wide and fixed on the still shape at my feet. Dren's two friends have backed themselves fully against the far wall, frozen, their faces gone pale in the particular way that fear drains color from skin, regardless of what world a person was born on. Nobody moves, nobody speaks. The corridor holds a silence so complete that I can hear the faint hum of the station's environmental systems somewhere behind the walls, a sound I have never once noticed before in 6 months of walking these halls, and now cannot stop hearing. I look down at my own hands, turning them slightly, as if I do not entirely recognize them, as if some part of me is still waiting for them to explain what they have just done. They do not shake. That is the thing I notice most, standing there in that terrible quiet. My hands do not shake at all. They are exactly as steady as they were this morning, exactly as steady as they were during 6 months of broken trays and torn notes and stolen seats, exactly as steady as my mother's hands have always been while she bakes bread or braids hair or does any of the small gentle things she has spent her life doing, with the same strength she has never once needed to use for anything else. I have spent my entire life being told that this strength was something to hold in reserve, something meant only for the worst moments, something never to be spent carelessly. I did not spend it carelessly. I want, standing in that corridor, for someone to understand that, for someone besides myself to know how many months I held this exact outcome away from us, how many small cruelties I absorbed without complaint, precisely so that this moment would never have to happen. But nobody in this corridor knows any of that. All they see is the result, and the result is more than enough to change everything. "Alina," Priya whispers, and her voice is so small it barely reaches me across the narrow space between us. "What did you do?" I do not have an answer that will make this easier for her to hear, so I do not try to give her one. Instead, I cross the corridor to where she stands, and I gently take her arm, the same arm Dren held only minutes before, and I guide her away from the wall, away from the stillness on the floor, toward the corridor that leads back to the wider station, and its lights, and its noise, and whatever ordinary life still exists beyond this narrow space that has just become the center of everything. Behind us, Dren's two friends finally find their voices, and the sound that follows us down the corridor is not shouting, not yet, but something closer to a rising, disbelieving murmur, the kind of sound that spreads through a station faster than any announcement ever could, carried mouth to mouth, corridor to corridor, until every single person aboard Caldris Spire will know, before the evening meal even begins, that something impossible has just happened within these walls. I do not run, even now, even with everything that has just occurred behind me. I do not run, because running would look like guilt, and I do not believe, standing in this moment, that what I did was born of guilt. It was born of 6 months of patience finally reaching its floor, of a promise stretched as far as any promise can stretch, before it simply cannot hold any further weight. Priya walks beside me in silence, her steps unsteady, her breathing shallow, and I keep my hand light on her arm, steady, grounding, the same way I imagine my mother's hand would feel in this exact situation, calm, even when everything around her was not. We reach the observation deck, the same one we were meant to meet at before any of this began, and I guide her to a bench near the great curved window that looks out over the gas giant, its storms twisting slowly below us, endless and indifferent to everything that has just happened in a narrow corridor 3 levels above them. Priya sits, and finally, the tears she has been holding back since the corridor begin to fall, quiet and steady, and I sit beside her without speaking, letting her cry, because I understand, in a way I do not think she fully does yet, that she is not only crying for what she just witnessed. She is crying because the world she believed she understood, the world where creatures like Dren Kalu were simply loud and cruel but never truly dangerous, and creatures like me were simply quiet and harmless, has just been proven wrong in the space of a few terrible seconds, and there is no way to unlearn something like that once you have seen it. "I am sorry," I say quietly, after a long while, once her tears have slowed enough that I believe she can hear me. "I never wanted you to see that. I never wanted anyone to see that. I spent 6 months trying to make sure nobody would ever have to." She looks at me then, her eyes red, her face still pale, and there is fear in her expression, yes, but there is something else beneath it too, something more complicated than simple terror, something that looks almost like understanding, trying to take root beside the fear rather than replace it entirely. "He would not have stopped," she says finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Would he? Even if you had walked away today, he would have found me again tomorrow, or the day after, and you would not have been there." I do not answer her directly, because I do not know, and I will not pretend to certainty I do not have. But I think of the way Dren's grip tightened around her wrist before I ever arrived, the way his friends stood ready to help rather than stop him, the way 6 months of small cruelties had only ever grown larger, never smaller, no matter how much patience I offered in return. I do not know what would have happened tomorrow. I say honestly. I only know what happened today, and I know that I could not let it continue happening to you, even if it meant something I have spent my whole life trying never to become. Priya is quiet for a long moment, watching the storms churn below us through the great curved window, and when she finally speaks again, her voice has steadied, just slightly, into something that sounds less like fear and more like exhausted, careful thought. "The old stories," she says slowly, "the ones about your planet. I always thought they were exaggerated, something parents tell children to make them behave, the way we tell our own children stories about creatures that do not really exist anymore, if they ever did at all. I did not think there could really be a world so dangerous that it built people like you." "It is not that Earth built people who want to be dangerous," I say quietly, watching the storms with her. "It is that Earth never gave any of us the luxury of pretending danger was not real. We learned to be calm because panic gets people killed. We learned to be patient because reacting too quickly to every small threat would have made survival impossible. And we learned, all of us, from the time we are very small, exactly where the line sits between patience and consequence, because our world never once let us forget that the line exists." Priya nods slowly, though I do not think she fully understands. Not yet. Not in the way someone who grew up beneath Earth's unpredictable skies could ever fully understand. But she is trying, and in this moment, trying is more than I expected from anyone on this station, and it is enough to make the quiet, hollow feeling in my chest ease, just slightly, for the first time since the corridor went silent behind me. We sit together for a long while after that, watching the gas giant's endless storms twist and reform below us, saying very little, because there is very little left to say that either of us can fully put into words yet. The station around us has already begun to change. I can feel it even from here, in the sound of footsteps moving faster than usual through distant corridors, in the low hum of voices carrying news neither of us needs to hear repeated to understand. Somewhere behind us, in a narrow corridor 3 levels below, instructors have surely arrived by now. Security systems have surely been alerted. The 2 friends who watched everything unfold are surely, even now, telling their version of events to whoever will listen, a version that will spread through this station far faster and far less carefully than the truth ever could. I do not know yet what will happen to me because of what occurred in that corridor. I do not know whether the promise I made before leaving Earth, the promise of patience, of restraint, of quiet dignity, no matter the provocation, has just been broken beyond repair, or whether there might still be some way to explain what happened that does not end my time here entirely. I only know, sitting beside Priya on that quiet observation deck, watching storms I did not create, twist endlessly below a sky I did not choose, that 6 months of silence has finally, unavoidably, come to an end, and that whatever comes next, there is no going back to the version of myself that existed before that corridor, the version who could still believe, even for a little while longer, that patience alone would always be enough. Security arrives on the observation deck less than an hour later. 2 tall officers in the pale gray uniforms of Spire administration, their expressions carefully neutral in the practiced way of people who have been trained not to show fear even when they feel it. They ask me to come with them, quietly, without raising their voices, and I go without resistance, because resistance is not something I have any interest in offering anyone tonight. Priya tries to come with me, insisting through tears that she needs to explain what really happened, that none of this would have occurred if Dren had simply left us both alone, but the officers gently guide her toward a separate room instead, promising her a chance to give her account once mine has been recorded. I catch her eye before the doors close between us, and I try to offer her something steady in my expression, something that says this is not her burden to carry, though I do not know if it lands the way I intend it to. The inquiry room is small, quiet, lit by a soft blue glow that I imagine is meant to feel calming, though nothing about tonight feels calming to me at all. 3 administrators sit across from me, along with a 4th figure I do not recognize until she introduces herself as a liaison from the small human delegation stationed permanently aboard Caldris Spire, a woman named Dana Whitfield, whose presence here tells me, more than anything else could, exactly how seriously this situation is already being treated. I tell them everything. I do not soften it, and I do not exaggerate it either. I describe the tray, the torn notes, the stolen seat, the months of small cruelties that built, one after another, into the corridor where Dren Kalu grabbed Priya's wrist and would not let go. I describe how I asked him to release her, how I asked him again, how I gave him every opportunity I could find to walk away before anything else happened, and I describe, as plainly as I am able, the final moment itself, without pretending it was anything other than what it was. The administrators listen without interrupting, their expressions difficult to read, though I notice the way two of them glance briefly at each other during certain parts of my account, a small, wordless exchange that tells me this is not the first time they have needed to have a conversation like this, even if it is the first time it has involved a human. When I finish, there is a long silence in the room, and then Dana Whitfield speaks for the first time since introducing herself. "You understand," she says carefully, "that what happened tonight will not stay quiet. Word has already spread through most of the station. By morning, every student here, and likely several of the instructors, will know exactly what a human being is capable of when pushed far enough." "I understand," I say quietly. "This changes things," she continues, "for every human who comes after you. For better or worse, I do not think anyone here will ever again make the mistake of assuming your people are simply slow, or weak, or harmless. That misunderstanding protected all of you, in its own strange way, for as long as it lasted. It will not protect the next group of students the same way." I nod, because I understand this too, and because there is a part of me, quiet and tired, that grieves the loss of that misunderstanding, even as I recognize it could never have lasted forever. The inquiry continues for nearly 2 hours, moving through details I have already given twice, questions about intent, about alternatives, about whether I believed, in that final moment, that there was truly no other choice available to me. I answer everything honestly, even when honesty makes me sound less sympathetic than I might otherwise wish to appear, because I decided, somewhere in that quiet corridor, that whatever came after would have to be built on truth rather than a comfortable version of events designed to protect me. In the end, the administrators tell me that a formal review will take place, that my status as a student will be suspended during the process, and that the final decision regarding any consequences will rest with a joint council that includes representatives from several species, including, for the first time in the Spire's long history, a formal seat reserved for human observers. I am escorted back to my room afterward, alone, and I sit on the edge of my bed for a long time without moving, staring at the picture of my family on my desk, my father's arm around my mother, my brother's face caught mid-laugh, and my own younger self standing slightly apart from all of them, already serious, already watching the horizon instead of the camera. I think about what Dana Whitfield said, about how this changes things for every human who comes after me, and I wonder, with a heaviness that settles slowly into my chest, whether I have just made things easier or harder for all of them, whether the galaxy learning the truth about what we are capable of will protect future students from cruelty, or simply replace one kind of danger with another, fear instead of scorn, caution instead of contempt. I do not sleep well that night, and when morning comes, I am not surprised to find that the station has changed overnight in ways both large and small. Students who once laughed at me in the dining hall now go quiet when I pass, their eyes following me with a wariness that was never there before. Some of them look away entirely, unwilling to meet my gaze at all. Others watch me with an open curiosity that feels almost more uncomfortable than the fear, as if I have become something to be studied rather than simply someone to know. Priya finds me at breakfast, sliding into the seat across from me without hesitation, the same way she did on the very first day we met in gravity theory class, and something in that small, ordinary gesture eases the tightness in my chest more than anything the administrators said to me the night before. "They are saying all kinds of things," she tells me quietly, glancing around at the tables nearby, most of which have gone unusually silent since I sat down. Some of them are saying you attacked him without reason. Others are saying he had it coming for months, and everyone just chose not to see it. I told the investigators the truth, everything, exactly how it happened. I do not know if it will matter. Thank you, I say, and I mean it fully, because I know how much courage it must have taken for someone from a species with no history of confrontation to stand in front of an inquiry and describe, in detail, a moment none of us wanted to live through in the first place. Over the following days, the review process moves slowly, the way these things tend to, gathering statements from Dren's two friends, from instructors who had noticed the pattern of harassment but never intervened as firmly as they should have, from other students who had watched months of small cruelties happen in dining halls and corridors without ever speaking up on my behalf. The council's final decision, when it comes, surprises me less than I expected it to. I am not expelled. I am not returned to Earth in disgrace. Instead, I am given a formal reprimand for failing to report the escalating harassment to station authorities earlier. A fair criticism, one I accept without argument, because I know that 6 months of silence, however carefully intended, closed off paths that might otherwise have prevented that corridor from ever happening at all. But alongside the reprimand comes something else, something I did not expect. The council acknowledges, in careful, formal language, that the situation was provoked by repeated, escalating aggression that I did not initiate, that I made multiple documented attempts to de-escalate the confrontation before its conclusion, and that the outcome, however severe, occurred in direct response to an immediate threat against myself and another student. Dana Whitfield meets with me privately after the council's decision is announced, her expression softer now than it was during the inquiry, though still careful, still measured. "For what it is worth," she says, sitting across from me in a small, quiet office that overlooks the same gas giant I have spent so many hours watching from the observation deck, "I do not think you did anything wrong, given the situation you were placed in. I only wish you had trusted us enough to bring this to us sooner. That is on all of us, not just you. We should have been watching more closely. We should have noticed the pattern before it reached this point. I did not want to be the human who caused trouble, I admit quietly. I did not want to be the reason people started telling the old stories about Earth again, the ones about Deathworlds and broken people. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, none of that would ever need to come up." Dana is silent for a moment, considering this, and then she says something that stays with me long after our conversation ends. "The old stories were never entirely wrong," she says gently. "They were only ever missing the most important part. Yes, your world is dangerous. Yes, it built people capable of things that frighten the rest of the galaxy. But it did not build monsters, Elena. It built people who understand exactly what they are capable of and who choose, every single day, not to use it, until the day comes when choosing otherwise is the only thing left protecting someone who cannot protect themselves. That is not something to hide. That is something the rest of the galaxy is only now beginning to understand." I think about her words often in the weeks that follow, as life at Caldra Spire slowly, carefully, finds a new kind of normal. The whispers do not disappear entirely, but they change in character, becoming less cruel and more curious, less contemptuous and more cautious. Students I have never spoken to begin greeting me in corridors, not out of friendship, not yet, but out of a wary respect that feels strange after 6 months of being invisible or mocked. Priya remains my closest friend through all of it, and in time, a few other students begin joining us at meals, drawn, I think, by simple curiosity at first, and later by something closer to genuine interest in who I actually am beyond the story that spread through the station in the hours after that corridor. I write to my brother that night, finally, and I tell him everything, because I have decided I am done carrying this alone, done pretending that patience and silence are the same thing as strength. He writes back 3 days later, once the relay finally carries his message across the distance between our worlds, and his response is shorter than I expect, though it carries more weight than anything else anyone has said to me since that corridor went quiet. He tells me our parents are proud of me, not for what happened, but for how long I held the line before it finally broke, and for making sure, even in that final moment, that the person I was protecting made it out safely. He tells me that back home, everyone understands what it costs to hold patience as long as I did, because everyone here has had to learn that same lesson at some point in their own lives, in their own way, against their own storms. I sit with his message for a long time that evening, looking out at the gas giant's endless, indifferent clouds, and I think about the old stories the galaxy tells about my planet, the ones about deathworlds and broken things, and I think about how wrong they always were, and how right, in their own strange, incomplete way, they might have been all along. Earth did not make me dangerous. Earth made me patient, and careful, and quiet, and gave me the discipline to hold that patience through 6 months of cruelty I never once deserved. But Earth also taught me, in the end, exactly where the line sits, the one between patience and consequence, the one every human learns to recognize before we are ever old enough to understand why it matters. Dren Kalu crossed that line, and paid the full weight of what crossing it costs, and I will carry that weight with me for the rest of my life. Not with pride, and not entirely with regret either, but with the quiet, steady understanding that some lines exist for a reason, and that the galaxy, whether it is ready or not, has just learned exactly why my world drew that line the way it did in the first place. The storms below the observation deck continue turning, endless and patient, the way they always have, the way they always will, and I sit and watch them for a long while, feeling, for the first time in 6 months, something close to peace settle quietly over everything that came before.